Hey guys, Bicebump here, bringing you this Dragonflight Unholy DK beginner guide. This video is for you out there who's just picking up the Unholy DK for the first time in Dragonflight and want a comprehensive and easy starter guide. I will talk through the rotation primarily, not covering every single little aspect you need to know, just broad outlines and in good detail, so you hopefully get a good grasp of like the core rotation. And then I'll also showcase some starter talent builds, not talk too much about those, just kind of show them and talk about how they work and what they do. Right, so to start off with rotation, I think it's relevant to first of all cover our resources. So the Unholy Death Knight has two primary resources. We have runes and runic power. The runes are the little spherical or circular skulls below your character portrait. I'll highlight them up here. You have 6 of those, and those are spent on your damage abilities pretty much. We also have runic power, which is the bar below those runes. This is generated by spending runes, so every time you spend a rune you get 10 runic power, and it's used for some spender abilities. Yeah. For the rune specifically, once you use a rune, it's going to recharge over time, and it takes 10 seconds to recharge baseline, and that's then reduced by haste. So if you have a 100% haste, it will take 5 seconds. Importantly, kind of like a legacy thing going on here, but you can only ever recharge 3 runes at a time. So if you spend all your 6, you will see that 3 of them just sit there and wait, whereas the other 3 are kind of recharging. And once those recharge, the other 3 is going to start. This is a bit important in our rotation, because if we want to manage resources properly, we want to ensure that we always have 3 runes recharging. That's like the maximum amount of recharge going on there, which means that you don't need to spend all your runes to efficiently manage your resources. Something important to remember. Right, so those were your resources. Let's talk about the actual rotation, and I'm gonna split this up into your core rotation and your cooldowns. I feel like personally it makes more sense to understand, you know, we have some buttons which we press a lot in our rotation, and that's kind of the core, and then you have our cooldowns and how they interact, you know, 2 separate things essentially. So for our core rotation, we have essentially, I would say 4 spells. Yeah, we have Festering Strike, Skirt Strike, Death Call, and Outbreak. That's it. Those are the 4 spells in your core rotation, and let's cover what they do. So Festering Strike, it costs 2 runes, thus generating 20 runic power as well, and it applies 2 to 3 randomly festering wounds to the target. Now festering wounds is kind of like your third resource in a sense. It's a debuff you put on your target. It sits there for something like 20 to 30 seconds, and essentially what you can do is burst those wounds to deal damage and get some benefits. We'll get to that. The Unholy Rotation is essentially all about managing those wounds on the different targets you fight against. Yeah. Now Skirt Strike, it costs 1 rune, so lower cost than Festering Strike, and it bursts 1 festering wound on your target. And now you can kind of get that there's an interplay here. So Festering Strike builds festering wounds, Skirt Strike bursts them, right? When you burst a festering wound, it deals some damage to your target and gives you a small amount of runic power, 3 runic power. Can be talented to give you more. All right. Outside of this, you know, spending all those runes, bursting all those wounds will generate runic power, and that is what we then spend on Death Call, which is our primary runic power spender. Okay. We generally want to prioritize using Death Call to avoid going above our maximum runic power. It deals a ton of damage in single target, and it has a high priority. Finally, we have Outbreak, and this is what applies our Dot Virulent Plague. This should just be used to keep 100% uptime on our dot. Alright, so that's very, very simplified single target rotation. We have Festering Strike to build wounds, we have Scourge Strike to burst those wounds, we have Death Call to spend the rune power we generate, and we have Outbreak to keep up our dots. And in very simplistic sense, that is kind of everything you need to know. We also have a couple of buffs and procs in our rotation that we need to care about. Some of them a bit more than others, and starting out, I wouldn't pay too much attention to them, and then kind of look at them more closely once you learn the core rotation. Sudden Doom is an easy one. It makes your Death Call free of cost or epidemic, and it should just, you know, be spent as soon as possible. Essentially, you don't need to stress about it, but it's a good idea once you get it, do press the Death Call epidemic 1 or 2 TCDs afterwards. For uptime buffs, we have Playbringer as our primary one. It makes your diseases deal 100% more damage, they take 100% more quickly, and you keep it up by using Scourge Strike. It's a good idea to track this buff and make sure you press Scourge Strike at least every 5 seconds. That's pretty much it. Get a weak core out or similar, but as I said, don't do it at the start when you learn the rotation. Do it once you kind of got the hang of the basics. Finally, we have Icy Talents, which is a buff that's kept up whenever we spend runic power. So we need to spend Death Calls or Epidemics to keep it up. Also 5 seconds there. I would get a tracker and try and keep it up at 3 stacks as much as possible. But maybe not when you first start out. Learn the core and then move on to managing these buffs. We do need to talk about how this extends into AoE and how some of our talents interact with this. So first of all, we do generally pick up the Unholy Blight talent. Now this one also applies Virulent Plague and will replace Outbreak in a lot of cases. It does have 45-second cooldown, so when we use it, we won't be able to have 100% uptime. So what generally happens in a lot of scenarios is that you have Unholy Blight, and then you press Outbreak once before your next Unholy Blight comes up. Simple as that. We also have the Epidemic talent, and this is another runic power spender. This replaces Death Call whenever we fight 3 or more stacked targets. So essentially in every AoE situation, you'll be spending a runic power on Epidemic instead of Death Call. Cool. Let's talk about, so that's primarily single target, but also an AoE, but let's talk a little bit more about the AoE scenario. So the primary difference here is that we get Deafening Decay coming into play. So Deafening Decay doesn't do that much damage on its own. It's an AoE ability you put down on the ground. More importantly, when you stand in it, it makes your Scourge Strike cleave. And this is really quite good. It cleaves up to 8 total targets. So in AoE scenarios, what you're going to do is you're going to pop down your Deafening Decay and you're going to cleave with your Scourge Strike to do extra damage. And then as I said, you use Epidemic to spend your runic power, and furthermore you also maintain your Virulent Plague on every target. Yeah, and that's a primary difference between single target and AoE. Now there's a whole other science in AoE and Unholy, and it's related to the wounds, right? Because in AoE we can apply wounds in AoE, and we can burst them and pick up the Bursting Source talent to do a ton of damage. I won't dwell too much deeply into this, but overall the general vibe is that you have Dark Transformation, which will generate lots of wounds in AoE. You have Vile Contagion, which you also use, which spreads and generates a ton of wounds. And the whole idea there is to start off by generating lots of wounds for all the targets. You pop down your Deafening Decay, and when you hit Scourge Strike, it cleaves all the target, and every single target hit, it will burst a wound. And then it's going to deal lots of AoE damage, and the pack just blows up, yeah? I'm going to go ahead and say that generally, when you're playing Mythic Plus, right, you're going to have Dark Transformation for almost all the packs. When you have Dark Transformation, you want to use 2 Festering Strikes before you kind of pop down your Deafening Decay, right? I think that's a good number, 2 Festering Strikes. If you have Unholy Assault and Vile Contagion ready, don't need to do those Festering Strikes. A single one into Unholy Assault and Vile Contagion is better. I will do a specific Mythic class video because I understand this is just touching the surface of this. So do stay tuned for that. Now, let's talk about cooldowns because we covered the core rotation, both single target and AoE. For cleave, it's just like AoE essentially. You don't do anything different in cleave than you wouldn't do in AoE in a sense. So for cooldowns, we have quite a lot, right? And lucky for us, we generally talent them to all align on a 45-second kind of timing. So we have we have 3 cooldowns here that are all 45-second CD. Unholy Blight, Dark Transformation, and Apocalypse. And then we have a couple of cooldowns on 1.5 minute CD, like Unholy Assault. And then we have some 3-minute ones, like Army of Dead, effectively, and Summon Gargle. In a raiding environment, and generally overall, we want to always align our cooldowns, and that's going to happen every 45 seconds. And it's not that tricky to set up. Apocalypse is the main one. It bursts up to 4 wounds on your target, and you want to make sure you have 4 wounds on your target when you do it. The other ones, you just kind of press without interacting too much. So what happens is that every 45 seconds, you're going to press all the cooldowns you have available. So always going to be Dark Transformation, Apocalypse, and Unholy Blight if you have that talented. Every 1.5 minutes, you're going to use Unholy Assault if you have that. It's actually, you can either do it before Apocalypse, but it's generally better to do it after Apocalypse. And then every 3 minutes, you're going to use your Army and Gargle. When it comes to cooldowns that don't align on 45-second cooldown, which is going to be Empower Rune Weapon and Abomination Limb. For Empower Rune Weapon, you hold that for every 3 minutes. For Abomination Limb, you just use that whenever it's appropriate. Generally, you will use it on kind of ads and that kind of thing. For Gargle, I want to mention that once you press that, using up your runic power is going to be your highest priority. Finally, I want to cover Soul Reaper, which is kind of like a pseudo cooldown. It has a 6-second cooldown. You want to use this. When you use it, it puts a debuff on your target, and after 5 seconds, I believe, it will explode if the target is below 35% health. And this deals a ton of damage. What you want to do is that whatever you're hitting is below 35% health, just press Soul Reaper as much as possible. That's it. Alright, as I said, I will put out an advanced rotation video which delves a lot deeper into all the aspects I discussed today, and hopefully it's going to be useful to bring you to the next level in your Unholy DK kind of DPS journey. Now let's move on to some talents I want to show you. So first of all, up here is the kind of generic raiding build. You might notice that this is very pet centric. We pick up Summon Gargle, we pick up Army of the Damned, we go all the way into Commander of the Dead. Yeah, very, very pet centric. And because we pick up Commander of the Dead, it means that our Dark Transformation becomes like this huge buff for any pets. This is why I talked about earlier that we want to align our cooldowns, is to, for instance, one of the reasons is because we want to buff our pets with Dark Transformation. Generally, use Dark Transformation after you used all your pet summoning abilities. So use Army, use Gargle, use Apocalypse, and then you press Dark Transformation. Is the general kind of vibe. For Mythic class, we run the build up here. This is a wound-centric build. So you can see we have Bursting Swords up there. We have Unholy Assault, Vile Contagion. And it's all about what I talked about earlier, where we build up wounds and then pop down Death and Decay and we burst them all. Finally, a kind of third option here is to pick up the disease build, which runs Ebb and Fever. And this build is much more about your dot damage. Okay? And it's centered around an ability I said earlier, which is Plague Bringer. It's a buff that you get on yourself when you use Scourge Strike, which makes your dots deal like 100% more damage. They take 100% more quickly, but it's the same thing. And that build is all about keep maintaining that buff. So if you want to run that, you want to track that a bit more carefully. All right. Okay. Finally, I think we should discuss some openers because these are going to be kind of nice to just have on paper, so you know that when I do engage a boss or like a pack, I do it in the right order. So we have this single target opener here, right? This uses all the kind of standard abilities that are available to you when you pick up the raid talent build I showed you earlier. One thing you might notice is that Dark Transformation comes before Apocalypse. That might seem a bit odd. However, Dark Transformation has this little window where you still get the Command of the Dead buff when you apply it. The thing is that you can use Dark Transformation and wait 2 GCDs and then press Apocalypse, and it's going to be fine. They're still going to get the buff. For Mythic Plus, this is kind of the general rotation. It's a lot more complicated and it matters a lot more. But when you have all your cooldowns, or just drop the cooldowns from this, and you can follow that, and it's going to work okay for you. As I said, Mythic Plus rotation is much more complicated, and I'm going to spend an entire video just talking about it and how you can optimize it. Alright, so that was the Unholy Rotation Beginner Guide. Do leave a comment down below, let me know if you like this video, if it helped you start out with Unholy DK. Leave an upvote, downvote, depending on what you thought about this. Do consider subscribing, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you very much for watching. Bye bye.